Yes, welcome back to the African Diaspora News channel. My name is Richard Sudan. Thank you very much for tuning in. Before we begin, please remember to like and subscribe and support the channel and tell a friend to tell a friend. Now, a very interesting story to bring to you today, and I just came across a staggering piece of information which I wanted to share with you today. I'm not sure if you know this. If you do, bear with me, walk with me. If you don't, get ready to hear this. So I was doing some research the other day on the situation on policing and budgets in the United States of America. A lot of you know this is something I tend to focus on a lot, both in the US and here in the UK. Now, it turns out, imagine this, New York City has paid more than $1.1 billion since 2015 over alleged NYPD misconduct and civil rights violations. Let me say that figure again. The state of New York has paid more, in excess of $1.1 billion since 2015 over alleged NYPD misconduct, cases and civil rights violations. I use the word alleged there very loosely. Obviously, we're on YouTube, but you understand where I'm coming from. Now, just consider that figure for a moment. $1.1 billion, $1,000 million have been paid out by the state of New York because of the conduct of the New York Police Department across the state since 2015 alone. Now, there's a couple of quick points to unpack with this. First of all, that's a staggering figure when you consider the overall budget of the New York Police Department. Second of all, these are rather the cases that we know about. In other words, these payouts that New York State has been forced to pay out because of the conduct of the NYPD, these are the cases, presumably the cases and litigations that have been brought against the state. In other words, people have gone to their lawyers and they've brought cases against the NYPD. They've gone to court and the state has ruled in many of those cases misconduct, and there's also the courts have ruled there's been civil rights violations. Now, I wonder, first of all, just how many cases actually we don't know about, just how many cases of police brutality, alleged police brutality and misconduct that we do not know about, that never see the light of day and never end up in court. Now, we could hasten a guess. Maybe it's double the cases, maybe it's more than that, maybe it's less than that. But for sure, there will be many more cases that never saw the light of day. Now, $1.1 billion since 2015 alone. Now, we can only imagine how much money has been paid out before 2015, but this is dealing specifically within the last 8 years. Now, the other thing that really strikes me here is, the police are supposed to be a public institution, and actually, of course, we all know, in theory, they're supposed to protect the public, but we know the figures. We know that black people are massively, disproportionately affected by police violence, despite not being the majority in the country. Also, we know, of course, $1.1 billion, $1,000 million have been paid out. New York is a place where there's homelessness all across the state. It's a massive, massive problem, as you all know. And of course, the other thing that comes into the fray is the question of reparations. We hear time and time again that there's no money for reparations. Well, clearly there is money for reparations. We don't just need to pin that conclusion on the police department alone. There's a number of reasons, a number of ways we could all think of that we know money is misspent all across the country. War is obviously the biggest example. I dare say there's probably trillions now that have been paid out to fund, bankroll, prop up the ongoing war in Ukraine, which is now about to enter the first year anniversary. Excuse my voice, by the way, if it's a little bit raspy, just coming off the back of a cold. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. Now, $1.1 billion, that is an eye-watering figure. And, it begs a number of questions, really. At what point is there going to be some serious scrutiny, some sort of executive action from the federal government on policing? Answers on a postcard. We know now, as Joe Biden enters further down the road in his presidency, we realised there's no real commitment to kick the can of serious police reform down the road. And by serious police reform, I mean a set of checks and balances which hold the police to account, not least getting rid of qualified immunity for the police, which, as I understand it, came into being in the 1960s. Now, I actually tweeted about this the other day, about the $1.1 billion that have been paid out. And actually, I want to read out a couple of reactions, which I think are very interesting. Miss Taboo commented on the tweet, and she said, and I quote, at Ms. Taboo, shout out to her, maintaining white supremacy is very expensive, but worth it to those who believe in mistreating people based on skin color. Powerful reaction there. We have one from Lamar West at Laws and Lands 360, who says if they start taking that settlement claim money directly from their budget instead of the citizens, you will see a swift change in police reform. Now that's an interesting reaction there. In other words, if the money was taken directly from the police's budget rather than coming out of the taxpayer's pocket, which is really where this is going to come from ultimately, would you see a change in action from the police? Interesting question there. Now, the other thing to think about here really is that, remember a couple of years back with the Democrats, the whole cry of defund and reform the police was super popular among the Democrats and the left-wing media, and Joe Biden and his friends made a big point of, I would say, in my opinion, pretending to entertain the notion that they were going to bring about serious police reform. And of course, one of the big questions within that was the idea of defunding the police. Now, very quickly, as we saw, the rallying cry went from defund the police to refund the police. Joe Biden, one of the first things he did in office, didn't talk about reparations, didn't talk about serious police reform, but he did throw a lot of money at the police. And I believe, if my sources are correct, he's also pledged to increase the budget for policing over the next year or so. And so, I think there are serious questions here to ask about the NYPD. Of course, there were. I had no idea the figure was as big as it was. $1.1 billion paid out over NYPD alleged misconduct and civil rights violations since 2015 alone. Now, you would think this is enough to move and motivate any sensible politicians really interested in public service to do something about this. But of course it's not. The police in the US operate as they operate, and they operate with complete impunity, with complete, a complete lack of accountability, and that really explains why they continue to operate how they do. But yeah, for now I wanted to bring that quick story to you. I'm going to be digging into the question around other police departments across the United States, because it will come to no shock to anyone to imagine this is probably the case all across the country. And I'm highlighting New York because a lot of people sort of really kind of always hail New York for one reason or another, as being sort of, I don't want to say one of the more enlightened areas of the country, but there is a perception that racism and white supremacy, there's a perception peddled by some that it's really just a problem in sort of the southern states of America. And of course, we know that to be an illogical fallacy. You only have to look at Los Angeles, for example, and I'm going to get right into that now, and we can talk about that in the next one. But yeah, so much money is being wasted really on, paying out, not wasted, because I dare say all the money that was paid out was absolutely necessary and should have been paid out. But what I mean is that $1.1 billion should never have to have been paid out. The police should be doing their job. They should be protecting and serving. They should be upholding the oath that they took and the commitment they took. But of course, we see these kinds of figures, and it really reminds us that the institution really is corrupt from top to bottom. And we know one of the big problems really within policing is, of course, racist, white supremacists within the ranks, and the fact they've thoroughly corrupted any semblance of real policing in the United States. And we know, of course, that when it comes to lynchings of black people, the main perpetrators are corrupt police officers. And of course, they now operate in a culture where they see, over and over again, police officers evade justice, evade any charges. Of course, we see the big cases come to the fray every now and again, but in my opinion, as important as those are, for example, the George Floyd case, we saw a semblance of justice there, a stepping stone to accountability. It is not the case across the board. And just to remind you, with the case of George Floyd, for example, if I remember this correctly, Derek Chauvin ended up getting convicted on second-degree manslaughter charges. It was never first-degree murder. So that shows you just how big of a mountain there really is to climb. That $1.1 billion, there are so many better ways that money could be spent. People are really struggling all across the country, struggling to heat their homes, struggling to feed their families, and black people are dealing with a police force which, I don't know how it feels to be black in America, but they're dealing with a police force in the United States which is thoroughly corrupted, with a deadly epidemic of violent policing. It needs to come to an end. There needs to be some real leadership from the top. It's not coming from Joe Biden. It's not coming from the Democrats. They've been there for a while now. They did have control of both houses, or they had even more sway in both houses. Of course, that political honeymoon is finished, and of course now we're going to hear the excuses, well, if Joe Biden gets another 4 years, if Joe Biden this, if Joe Biden that, etc., etc. But yeah, not to waffle on for too long, just wanted to bring you that information. Let me know what you think about this topic in the comments, and we'll continue this conversation, no doubt. For now, I want to thank you for tuning in. This is the African Diaspora News channel. My name is Richard Sudan. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.